I'm certainly honored to be here and certainly excited about the responsibility that you've taken on in the service of helping and working with those who are often left out of the political equation. And all the discourse that happens in this city, the public discourse that happens in this country, and particularly this city that I love. It's always, I'm writing whatever I'm thinking or feeling on the road. In some sense, I want to first of all congratulate you, the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, HSH, for the work you've done since your inception and the work you've accomplished in the present and future as it pertains to the issues of homelessness, coordinating services for families and citizens affected by the homelessness, whether they're temporary or whether it's chronic. This initial conference of HSH, nonprofits partners, provides a focal point to assess your accomplishments as well as your challenges moving forward. And I'm honored to be here as a native of San Franciscan, to be here this afternoon to play my part in encouraging you and celebrating your work, not simply as someone who is known and recognized in popular culture, but more importantly, as a citizen in this city, a citizen in this democracy. I arrived home after 2 weeks just at 1 o'clock this morning and traveling from Georgia to Vermont to New York City and just recently to Washington, D.C. And all of them have some sort of centrality in the work that I attempt to do as a citizen, and certainly intersects with the work that you do as well. Those citizens who represent the increasing numbers of Americans that are dispossessed of their assurance of a home, a roof over their head, in some ways represent the families and individuals of our internal refugee crisis. We often kind of look at the issue around refugees as something that is outside of our purview, but it is an internal crisis that exists. We know that there are many factors around that crisis, and those factors were discussed this weekend. Some of those factors were discussed last week when I was in Vermont as a fellow of the Sanders Institute at the gathering. The housing crisis. I bear witness to that housing crisis because I've lived here and lived in the same neighborhood since I was 11 years ago. For over 61 years, I've lived in the Haight-Ashbury. And I know the crisis there. When I first purchased my house as a city employee for the Model Cities Programs in the Office of Community Development, which I came to in 1971 and was there for 6.5 years. When I first purchased my house in 1975, just before my 29th birthday, it was affordable. Up from next door to me, the family that I bought my house from knew my parents and worked at the post office with my parents. The neighbor up the street knew my parents and worked at the post office with my parents. The neighbor across the street knew my parents and worked at the post office. Now they had a unique opportunity at that particular time as African Americans who they had a unique opportunity to buy a home, an affordable home in San Francisco because they had good paying jobs. In this case, they worked at the Federal Post Office service and everything. So I know that story. This story is something that I've lived and breathed because I've lived in this same city outside of just briefly at other places in the country, but for all of my life. So when I grew up in the projects in Hunters Point, and the Army Street projects on 3rd and Army, and the 19th Street projects on 19th. And the schools I went to are schools that maybe are closed now. Irvin M. Scott and Daniel Webster's Elementary School. I went to Roosevelt Middle School. I went to George Washington High School, City College, Community College. I'm preaching to some of the choir right here. They know we have the same dynamic. So we understand this. I chose to live in this city. Maybe there were opportunities for me to live somewhere else, but this is where I chose to live. And I continue to choose to live here because you can't escape, you can't run away from the problems that are epidemic to not only San Francisco, but an epidemic to every urban city in this country. I first started going to the Western Addiction Community Organization meetings, Waco, in 1966, in the summer and fall of 1966. That time we called it redevelopment. Redevelopment Agency and HUD had this mandate to redevelop the Fillmore. And I saw the most incredible people fighting, people from multi-generational, fighting to have a voice in that process, a voice in that redevelopment. They were Wadi, who I knew because he ran the Boys Club, the YMCA in the Fillmore district, and others that came there, young and old, who came to those particular meetings to have a voice in what was the ensuing collapse of a traditional black community, the Fillmore district, also known as Harlem West. So those are the things. So inevitably, my current passion comes from most of those things so far, and being a citizen here. We had the privilege of living in the same neighborhood, and like I said, for over 60 years. And I attended those community meetings. I became an employee of the Office of Community Development and Model Cities Program in 1971. After doing my internship in the spring of 1971 at the Berkeley City Planning Department. At the Berkeley Planning Department, where Gus Newport, the former mayor, says that my name is still on the planning study, a zoning study. He said, your name is on that planning study as an intern. So what I'm trying to say is that, and I'm talking about, I want to keep encouraging you for the work that you're doing, and I know for sure the only way that we can build and sustain a focused and dynamic movement pertaining to the critical issues around homeless is from the outside, through the actions of ordinary citizens and concerned citizens, how we understand the historic and systemic determinants and their intersectionalism with class and race is essential to building that, to end homelessness. And we have to understand that it is a process. We begin here with your passion, with your commitment, and the strength of that are the first, just one vantage points of the issue that we have to deal with. Because it's surrounded, as I said, by many issues around here. It's surrounded by employment. It's surrounded by access to economic activities. It's surrounded by access to education. It's surrounded by all those things. And that we have to take in consideration all of these things that are systemic in their nature, and reflecting what do we do, how do we build a sustained movement. And we have to think about what does sustainable activism mean in the 21st century? What does it mean? How do we find ways in which there's an intersectionalism between issues itself? We have right on our table, as we right now, the issue of climate change. And we have a very short image, a very short window in which we can begin to address the issue of climate change and global warming today. How do we connect that issue with homelessness? How do we connect that issue with education? How do you connect that issue with developing jobs that are socially responsible jobs in our communities, jobs that really elevate in terms of development who we are as human beings? Those are the important issues that are here. So we separate the homeless issue from that, then we miss the opportunity to reach out to the much larger issues that we have embodied with it. And the act of service. Dr. Martin Luther King always talked about what service meant, what service is, what citizenship means. in the act of service. It's important. So the service that you provide now, the service that you provide in building these coalitions, of building relationships that have dynamics that we don't know how those relationships and where those relationships would develop into stronger relationships in which we can change and transform. And that change has to be transformative. It has to be transformative. Where do we find the link of that transformation? Because it has to transform not only us personally, it has to transform our communities, and it has to transform those people who act supposedly on the behalf of us in the political arena. Those are the important issues that we have to deal with and confront with. I applaud you once again for your state right now. This is just the first. And I'm honored, like I said, to be a part of the first conference that brings together all these elements. And there are other elements that you'll find along the way, along this journey. And it's about the journey. It's about the journey and strengthening ourselves through that journey, and also bringing about the changes that we know not only are necessary, but imperative. So it's about that journey. We're going to battles that we're going to win. There are going to be moments that we're going to feel as if defeated. There will be moments that we're going to feel demoralized in some way, but we keep and strengthen our resolve. And in strengthening that resolve, perhaps we have the opportunity to create these conditions that everyone has the opportunity to have a roof over their heads and is available to them. I was talking, mentioned before, in part of my work in that other world that existed, I had an opportunity in 1992 to do a movie called The Saint of Fort Washington with Matt Dillon. And there were homeless organizations that used that movie as a platform for organizing more than 26 years ago. And think about that, it's interesting when I was telling you how things work in a certain business. I had a script about what I thought about Lyle Kassler, who was the writer and director of that script. And we couldn't find anybody who wanted to do it. As soon as Warner Brothers wanted to do Lethal Weapon 3, I found a buyer. So in order for them to get me to do Lethal Weapon 3, when they wanted it, I said one thing: you put up the other half of the money that's necessary to make this movie. So cultural production can play a role in identifying the problem and celebrating the work that will bring and the real stories that people have with regard to homelessness and other issues as well. So thank you once again for allowing me to speak, take this moment to speak to you, and certainly celebrate you at this particular, it's this moment in your own growth and development in the struggle for justice. Thank you. All right.